All right, nearly 7 years ago, a major fire broke out at a residential building in London. It killed 72 people. This was a devastating, horrific, terrible fire, and the investigation into the fire at the Grenfell Tower, which you're seeing on your screen right now, reveals failures by the government of the United Kingdom, builders, contractors, and a lack of strategy from those first responders who arrived onto the scene. This was the UK's biggest fire since World War II. Sadly, tragically, residents were trapped inside this high-rise apartment building. A retired judge that headlined the inquiry says all of these deaths were all avoidable. I want to bring in BBC correspondent Ellie Price, who is at the site in West London where that fire happened years ago. Ellie, we all remember watching this unfold on our screens here in the United States. I know for those of you in the UK who covered it, the horror was real, as you, in many cases, many people reporting from the scene saw this building burning and could understand what was happening inside because so many people were trapped. What did you learn reading through this inquiry, and what are people to take away from it?
Well, as you say, it was an absolutely horrendous time all those years ago, 7 years ago. Now, this inquiry has been going on for the last 6 years, and today we've had the result of that inquiry. The report spans 17,000 pages, and I want to bring some of the key phrases that we've pulled out of that report to really paint a picture of what went wrong. So we hear about there was a path to disaster that led not just in the years to the run-up to the fire, but decades in the run-up to the fire. As you mentioned there were problems with the government, the central government here at Westminster, that the governments had, to many extent, had plenty of opportunities. There'd been other fires in a similar situation to this one, and lessons hadn't been learnt from those fires. From 2010 onwards, there was a real insistence from central government here that there should be deregulation, so that had an impact on safety, and that often safety was ignored, delayed, or even disregarded. And then, of course, there were the companies that were responsible for the materials that were built onto the tower behind me that were responsible for the fire. We've heard a lot in this report about the cladding, about the insulation that was essentially attached to the outside of the building. And in the report, we heard that many of those companies responsible for those materials showed a systematic dishonesty about the safety of those materials, and that they indulged in a deliberate and sustained strategy and scheme to mislead those putting the materials on about how safe they were. Then we move on to the refurbishment of the tower, the people behind that, so the architects, as you say, the contractors, even the local council, how they had in some instances acted dishonestly, in other instances been incompetent in varying different degrees. And of course, that tenant management organisation, the organisation essentially that's meant to be the go-between between the residents and the people that own the building, how they had let down the residents and treated them often as militant troublemakers. Quickly, I want to just tell you about this also. As you mentioned before, that the way the London Fire Service reacted, how there should have been more training, we hear, because of fires that had acted in a similar way, but the training for the firefighters on the ground was not sufficient. And then finally, how those who survived, the families who survived, how they were treated and how that was inadequate in the aftermath of the fire.
Ellie, one of the things that this fire, I think, brought into stark contrast for people outside of the United Kingdom was just this level of classism that exists in Britain, where you had people who were of lower income living in this tower. And as you point out, the report points out that a lot of the warnings were ignored by officials for many, many years. In other words, residents were saying that the building was unsafe, but for many people, they had nowhere else to live, and people ignored their warnings until this devastating fire. So how are now the victims, the families of those victims, responding to this report? And what has the government said to them in the wake of all of this?
Well, as you might imagine, the government has been very open-minded. It says it's going to take on board all the recommendations that have been made in the report. And of course, it's essentially apologised to those living in the situation that they found themselves. Let me just draw a picture of where I am. Behind me, you can see a memorial wall that's been stood here ever since the fire was ripped through this tower. And above it remains what's left of the tower. In its shrouds, the worst of it obviously hidden by by a sheeting, but very much this is a testament to what happened in 2017 that still stands here and overlooks this community in West London, and it is very much part of the geography of this part of London. Now, we have heard from members, different groups attached to those who survived and people who lost people in this terrible fire. Many of them say that they have cautiously welcomed some of the recommendations, but they say justice, they feel, still has not been delivered. And that's because there have been no criminal prosecutions with regards to this fire on any level of anyone who may have been deemed to be responsible. Now, that's because the police have always said that they want the public inquiry to happen first. And now that's happened. The police say they'll need another year to 18 months to go through their investigation. So we're not looking at any criminal prosecutions being brought till the end of 2026. So justice, it would seem, is still some way off. And I should mention also there's been a lot of debate about what should happen to the tower now that, you know, after all these years on from the fire. Well, residents and indeed the families have said they don't want any memorial to stand in this place of this tower yet until they feel that justice has been done. And as I say, that could be some years on from now.
Yeah, justice delayed. Justice delayed is justice denied. Ellie Price, thank you very much for your reporting and extensive analysis of this horrible, horrible situation. We appreciate it.